Yeah, when I joined lynda.com and took over the enterprise side of the business, so LinkedIn bought lynda.com for about 1.5 billion.
The move to Ireland, why?
There happened to be this opening in the Dublin office in engineering that I was really interested in. So I did that for about 18 months. And then I got a call from LearnUpon, the co-founder of LearnUpon.
So who are LearnUpon for our audience that don't know them?
LearnUpon is an Ireland-based company that builds a learning management system.
How have you grown though in relation to that, right? Making tough decisions with compassion.
How do you do it with compassion? You have to do it. I'm a big believer in experience over theory. I think that in companies that I aspire to work for, a strong culture code is really important.
Russ, a pleasure to welcome you to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Thank you for saying yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you in person, Neil.
I'm from across the pond, the smaller pond of the Irish Sea in the UK, but you're from across the pond, slightly larger on the Atlantic, so
a little larger.
A little larger. Give me a quick overview of your background, where you're from, and then we'll get into the more current stuff then.
So my family, where I came into it, started really in the New York City area. And then when I was young, we moved upstate. So I grew up mostly in the country, but because my parents were not living together, we would travel down. My sister, my brother, and I would travel down to New York City very frequently. That's probably why I still feel like it's home. And I spent probably 20 years total in that area, a little over 20 years. And then there came a time when I was ready for a break from New York, and I decided kind of on a whim to move out to Los Angeles because it was like the polar opposite, and it was sunny every day and palm trees. This is before global warming really started to take effect. So I was in LA for, I think, 19 or 20 years, and then the Bay Area for 2 years, and then I came to Ireland. For the last 4.5, I've lived here now.
And the scale of the Bay Area from a startup ecosystem, like there's millions of startups, right? Like, just give me your sense of living and working there, just for our audience, just to give a bit of your story, your journey in that area, in that space, in that energy.
I was only there for 2 years, but what I can say is that you definitely feel the buzz, or at least I did. You normally feel it when you're in your car in traffic. But there's definitely a buzz, because I didn't work for a startup when I was there. I was working at LinkedIn at the time. I didn't get necessarily experience with startups, but I went through like the YC training and that kind of stuff because I was really interested. And it's interesting, some of the stuff in their program. I didn't go through it personally, but it's almost like in LA, you read into a network of acting and like the biz professionals, and it's the same thing in the Bay Area, but it's for startups and scale ups and technology companies essentially. And there's some decent restaurants there as well, but it's really spread out, and you can spend a lot of your life in a car, or at least you could when I lived there.
What year was that? When were you there?
The 2 years before the pandemic, like right before the pandemic. So we moved to Dublin. 6 weeks later, we were in lockdown. So we didn't even really get time to explore Ireland much before it was locked down. So like literally the 2 years before the pandemic, we were in the Bay Area. So that's the extent of my experience. I remember the day we moved up there. Because of the wildfires that you hear about in California, the air in the Bay Area just totally smelled like smoke. So we were like, what are we getting ourselves into here? But it went away, and it's tragic. But it was an interesting 2 years.
Now, how that manifested, right? I want to jump into lynda.com, right? For those that haven't heard of that company, give me a sense of that business, right? And you came in, and I really want to explore that journey from that to LinkedIn, and then because then that kind of correlates to the Irish opportunity. So just take us back there for a moment and share that part of your journey?
Yeah, when I joined lynda.com, I don't remember the year. It would be on my resume or my LinkedIn profile, but
2011, I think.
okay, I'll take your word for it. I was really struck by the degree to which the founders were involved so much. And that really helped me to get to know them and have my own relationship with them. And I even I even via social media will talk to Linda or Bruce every now and again. But it was the first time I'd worked for a company like that was successful, where access to the founders was wide open. You'd see them in the lunchroom, everywhere. So I joined and took over the enterprise side of the business, which was secondary to the consumer side. It started as a consumer business. And then over time, we got into enterprise sales. We started to sell into the enterprise and got pretty good at it. And when you sell to the enterprise, you need to do some things you don't have to do if you're a consumer business. If you're going to be a business and you're going to buy lynda.com, you're going to want to know, are we getting our money for this thing? So you need reports and you need insights, and you have to start to integrate with things like learning management systems. Remember, Lynda was not a learning management system. Lynda.com was a content library that was delivered through their website. A learning management system is a system of record, right? So you'll often find content from multiple sources in a learning management system. So we integrated with them, and there was a lot to unpack there, and what that meant, and what are the technologies, and single sign-on, and what do you do with PII when you're an enterprise? So I learned a lot through that process, and I think I was helping out with the enterprise side for about 3 or 4 years by the time LinkedIn came in, and they acquired Lynda for about $1.5 billion. Not a bad payday. And you could feel it right away, the change.
Before you get to that, I'm
Yeah.
just going to pause for a second, right? You said to me something, the best time to take on money is when you don't need money. You said something about it, and it just kind of, I was really curious to explore that.
Yeah. So the CEO at the time, I forget if it was at a company all hands or if it was in another meeting, was talking about the funding that we took on, and the business was doing very, very well. I didn't have access to the books or anything, but Lynda and Bruce were incredibly generous and caring of their employees. And they took on a round of funding. And I remember hearing the CEO at the time, Eric Robeson, say that the best time to take on money is when you don't need it. And I think I think what he meant was, if you're desperate for money, you'll accept terms you might not necessarily appreciate later. But yeah, that was an interesting quote. I know a lot of businesses that don't get that luxury. Some do, but I just thought that was an interesting quote from
More
him.
of a bargaining tactic, so when you're not, they can really smell the desperation when they're trying to negotiate the term sheet.
Yeah, that's right. And the closest association I can make is to the sense of patience that my brother has when buying a car. He will walk away. I'm more like, oh man, I love this car so much. I want to buy this car. But he will just walk away, and he'll forget about it.
Salesman loves you, and the
Yeah,
salesperson doesn't love the
that's
brother.
right. That's right. So, and I think that there's a certain benefit to having that kind of attitude, but you also need to be cognizant of the market and your position in it, I think, and where you're at, how well you're doing, and a lot of factors are going to need to be taken into account. But I just always remembered that quote.
Yeah, no, I like it. And so sorry, the LinkedIn, nice payday, 1.5. So talk to me then about that. So that's how the move happened, is it? They
From
wanted
me
you
to LinkedIn, yeah.
Yeah, and then they wanted you to
So
walk over to. How did that
yeah,
happen?
the change was pretty instant. The level of preparation that they had done was really kind of awe-inspiring to me, because on the day of the announcement, or maybe like the very next day, you had LinkedIn offices all over the world holding up signs that said "Welcome, Linda," and sending them to us. And you had people coming down to, at that point, the office I was in Calabasas, California, was, I don't know, I used to do this drive all the time, but maybe 90 minutes south of the headquarters, which was in Carpinteria, just south of Santa Barbara. And the development all was happening in the Calabasas office. So LinkedIn people were coming down, and we were constantly getting visited, and they just showed an enormous amount of support for us as they came in and tried to figure this business out and what it meant. Because at that point, LinkedIn was adding this, more about skills to the economic graph. And lynda.com was a way for them to be able to train people up or help them grow to realize economic opportunity, which is the LinkedIn vision, through training. And lynda.com, as I said earlier, is a content company. And so we had thousands of courses about how to use Photoshop and how to take good photos and how to develop in Python and how to do public speaking, right? We had a very vast content library. So LinkedIn bought lynda.com for the content. Then we rebuilt the whole platform on the LinkedIn stack. And that was interesting. That was an interesting project. That took a while.
So it was a very, just unpacking that a little bit, right? So that the attention to detail that LinkedIn put on that acquisition, that post-acquisition, and that the reality of the personalities and the different thing, that welcome, that was very deliberate, right? So that was clearly not their first rodeo in doing that.
That's how
right?
I took it.
Yeah, and clearly it was impactful. But then the reality, right, of when you're getting in and you're in that organization, I mean, there was, even back then, they were a big organization, right? And then you would just reference something that you loved, the access to the founders, and you'd see them,
Yeah,
like
very
that's
different.
Some contrast. How did you evolve?
Honestly,
as a person,
I struggled.
as a leader during that time?
I did struggle at first and during, and probably in some ways right up until the end.
Okay.
And it wasn't because suddenly I was working at a big company, because I had done that before. But I think that I was trying to find my way in the company from where I was at the time. I had literally, like 2 weeks earlier, just begun a search for a new position because I felt that my growth had plateaued at lynda.com. I still loved the company. I was a huge fan and everything. But I wanted to get to the next level and experience different things that I didn't even really know about. And so I started looking. And I remember I had talked to one recruiter so far. 2 weeks later, we're all called up to the Carpinteria office, and Jeff Weiner is there, the CEO, and Ryan Roslansky. And we talk about the acquisition, and right then and there, I just dropped my job search. And if you haven't ever heard Jeff Weiner speak, you should. Yeah. So I was really inspired by the new leadership. I immediately saw ways that I could grow. And so I said, I'm going to give this more time. So we stayed in the Calabasas office for a couple of years. Eventually it closed, but it didn't close until right at the time I moved to the Bay Area. That was part of that whole transition. So yeah, that's how I got to the Bay Area.
And were you, like, looking at the level of responsibility, like when you said you struggled, right? Sorry if I'm going to probe a little bit here, right? Sure. But what was the actual main part that with a bit of hindsight, when you look back and you think, God, maybe it was that, or like, was it, I don't know, did you feel a bit confined? Was it like the difference in the type of role? Was it the access to the strategic team? Like, what were the actual parts? What were the components of that struggle when you look back? And then maybe what did you actually learn from it?
I think it would probably boil down to finding a source of truth. And as an example, to skip ahead, to retroactively illustrate what I mean, I would say that I had 7 managers in 6 years. Okay, so that right away probably paints a picture. What I struggled with, I think, was it was a new organization. Yes, there were product managers at Lynda. Yes, there were designers at Lynda. They were both at LinkedIn. They just approached the job in a different way, I think, than I was used to. And so I was trying to learn and grow as much as I could. Sometimes I'd get conflicting stories or advice. And I was just trying to find a source of truth. I was trying to find a mentor. So I had a mentor for a couple of years. He was very helpful. I found that the day-to-day reality in the trenches and at the next level up was not necessarily reminiscent of the company vision to values at all times, right? Like they have members first, right? It's like their core value. Provide economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, right? I still remember their vision and their mission. But when you get down into the individual orgs, I'll repeat what I said earlier. We're all human beings. We all bring whatever we have to the job, and we're not necessarily all inspiring that same vision, mission, culture, values, etc. And I think that I had a lot of difficulty reconciling that with delivery, right? Because at the end of the day, delivery is what matters. And I don't mean delivering anything, right? I mean delivering something that is of value to the members or to the customer, right? You gotta ship. That's what it really boils down to. Doing it in a way that navigates the river of culture, values, objectives, priorities, strategy, all that kind of stuff. That's a lot harder than it sounds. And I would find that instinctively I would observe different people doing their job and feel this isn't really aligned with this particular value or that particular culture or whatever. And that was difficult for me to navigate because I knew how important it was to the executive team. And so I didn't really know how to react. I didn't really know what to do. So essentially, I just kind of dove into the work. And I was the one from the engineering side that led the project to move the business onto the lynda.com, onto the LinkedIn platform. And I learned a lot. I had some really good partners. I probably made them quite frustrated from time to time as I was growing into the role. But they had the patience to help me and to be honest with me. And that project to this day was probably the most significant accomplishment of my career, but also the one that caused the most blood, sweat, and tears. Right? It was a massive. I think it took like 4 years, and
it was all encompassing, was it?
Oh, all encompassing.
You're all over, yeah.
You can't move customers to the LinkedIn platform if you don't have the feature, right? So now you got to decide, okay, what features from the lynda.com platform are we going to rebuild over here? And do they look the same or are they different? Are we going to drop features? What does that mean for churn, right? So there enormous amount of discussion on what we were going to build. We built it as fast as we could. We tripped over ourselves a few times. We had to reach a point where we just had to slow down and fix a lot of broken windows, which I think is just natural, right? That happens all over the place. But that project was the one that I reflect on most, even to this day. And, that's going back like excuse me, it's going back 5 years or whatever by now since it was done. So,
but maybe if you just the way you speak about it, like, if you think about the different muscles you got to develop during that time, like usually when you're in the trenches or things are really tough, like that's probably where, if we're honest with ourselves, where a lot of the growth happens.
I think
force maneuver when we're out of our comfort zone and just the reality of the change of that dynamic and that role.
I think that's spot on.
And even if it was tough, it's clearly major maybe who you are in relation to the breadth and depth of your leadership.
Yeah, it's the hard things that shape us, I think, mostly. But I just remember in the last 6 months or so of the project, just for some reason, I just started to have a mind shift or some kind of shift where maybe I knew the end of the project was near and I was relieved or whatever, but I just started to do a little better. And the team that I was working with, I think, recognized that. In fact, the product partner that I had at the time, a great guy, used the phrase that I stuck the landing, which was a really nice thing to say after lots of mistakes along the way and things that could have gone better. But I learned from
it. Is that a gymnastic quote?
Yeah, it's a gymnastics quote. Yeah.
I love it.
So that I felt very thankful to him for being so kind. Yeah.
Oh, well, he probably earned it, I'd say. The move to Ireland, right? Why?
That's a great question. I had come to Europe late in my life. I think I was 30, I don't know, 4 or something. It was late in my life. And I was really blown away by things like, wow, that building is twice as old as my country. You don't get the U.S. is very new, right, comparatively. And I started to go back to Europe, and I was just drawn to it. And I knew that someday I want to retire here, probably in Italy. It never really occurred to me that I could work in Europe before I retired. And the idea of kind of expanding my international cultural experience was really attractive to me. So luckily, LinkedIn happened to have an office in Dublin. And luckily, right at the time that big project was wrapping up, there happened to be this opening in the Dublin office in engineering that I was really interested in. And it would have meant a complete org change, which was fine. And like going from the product engineering org to the data org. And the opportunity sounded really fascinating to me, which is basically the opportunity was to maximize the quantity and quality of information in the economic graph by doing things like, ingesting companies and using, AI and machine learning to examine. There's a vendor that crawls the internet called Common Crawl, and they make that available to anybody who wants to use it. Well, how could you unpack companies from there and information about them using machine learning? And so that was the team that I worked on. So I did that for about 18 months. And then I got a call, or I should say a LinkedIn message from LearnUpon, the co-founder of LearnUpon.
Brendan, is it?
Brendan is a co-founder, but my message was from Des.
Des. Yeah. So who are LearnUpon for our audience that don't know them?
LearnUpon is an Ireland-based company that builds a learning management system, and we do it in a very crowded space, but I think that one of the things that sets us apart is our customer service. Like we genuinely go above and beyond for our customers. And I can see it. Seth is the man that runs the customer org, and everybody in his org, you can just tell they are just customer focused. We go above and beyond. And I think that level of customer commitment is just something that I genuinely feel an affinity towards. So I spent a number of years consulting. It's a very different world. I think that can be much more about get the project, scope the project, finish the project, move on. But LearnUpon is genuinely interested in how we can deliver value to our customers. And I'm not saying nobody else is, but their commitment to that is one of the things that really drew me to the company. And I will say this. I was out of the learning business for 18 months. And when Des reached out, I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me, going back to the learning business? But I thought about it for a week or two, and I said, what if I could take all of the stuff I learned at lynda.com and at LinkedIn Learning and then apply it at a new company who is not as far down the road as those companies are? Could that be useful? And so I started to chat with Des, and it turns out that, it could really be useful. So we ended up agreeing, and here I am. It's been over 2 years now.
Oh, good for you. And they've had some success, and they seem to be in a great journey now. So hopefully you joined at the right time. Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
it's nice to see an Irish success story.
Yeah,
raising money and
enterprise
in a crowded
Ireland
space and still cracking on.
Totally.
So it's good to hear that.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, Enterprise Ireland. They were backed by that. Was it?
The
accelerator program initially, I thought.
So we have a grant from Enterprise Ireland that allows us to invest in future-facing features and technologies, and the aim of the grant is to bring jobs to Ireland. But Des and Brendan, their relationship with Enterprise Ireland goes way, way back, long before I was at the company. So they've done a number of events with them, kind of in a mentorship capacity, and they've had a very large impact on the two of them over time.
Yeah, no, I've witnessed it. It's been brilliant. Long may it continue. So let's chat a bit more about leadership, right?
Okay.
This is a leadership podcast. Now, a lot of our audience, so they tell me, they like to hear relatable stories. They could be in technical management roles, maybe head of engineering or engineering manager, or aspiring to be maybe director, VP, chief, maybe that track or that path. But one of the things that, it gets said to me on more than one occasion, the ability to manage down effectively. We'll talk about managing up in a minute, right? But when you become a manager of managers and climb that ladder, in relation to communication, messaging, delegation, empowerment, all of these things in relation to kind of when there's multiple layers in an org, can you just share one or two things in relation to how you've learned and how you've grown as a leader to actually crack that? Because it's not easy. And I do think sometimes if people go into, maybe come from maybe an engineer into software dev manager type role, or architect, principal engineer, and then get into management, line management, and into manager of manager, again, we have to evolve those skills all the time. But I'm curious about your story and how you kind of mastered, or on that journey of mastering.
I'm not.
You know what I mean, though, right? That
it.
managing down multiple layers, getting the messaging right, without stepping on toes, right?
Well, that's the key. I think you just nailed one of the hugest problems, right? So when you have individual contributors reporting to you, the way I do it, you're deeply involved in everything that they're doing and their career paths, and making sure they understand what the goals are and how what they're doing ladders up to the goals, right? Like you're deeply involved. When you are higher than that and you have managers reporting to you, now you're in a position of hoping your message and your goals are getting through to the engineers via other people. And this is one of the things when we talked about when I first got to LinkedIn, there was a lot of different types of messaging and discussions and interpretations of the vision to values and everything. It becomes exponentially harder, at least for me. There might be people out there for them it might have been a breeze, but one of the hardest things for me has been making sure each and every one of those people at the first level understands why we're here, how we operate, who we are, what's expected of them. One example would be, are you familiar with OKRs?
Yeah.
So there was one point, I don't remember where it was, but we were short on a manager, so I jumped in day to day to help the team, and the team wasn't aware that the OKRs are in order for a reason. Right. No, that's like a fundamental thing, right? The one on the top is where you should be putting most of your energy. And if you could only do one thing, that would be it, right? But no, they just didn't have that awareness. So even things like that, you can't take anything for granted. When you are a level or 2 or 3 or whatever higher, you also have to be cognizant that the people who are on the journey with you understand specifically how to hold people accountable. And this, I find, especially with new managers, is one of the hardest things, holding them accountable. You were supposed to, you said you were going to get this done. It was your commitment, not mine. Now it's not done. And you don't wait till the end to do that, right? You try to help them along the way. But when you're separated by multiple levels, that becomes way harder. So how do you do that without stepping on the manager's toes? Because if I'm just going to come in and I'm going to make sure everybody's doing their job and they're going to meet all their goals, then what do I need the manager for? So it gets incredibly hard to have influence in that way without stepping on people's toes. I like to take a step back when I can to create space for people to fill. But there's sometimes when you can't do that. You need to dive in, and you need to, sometimes you can get to the point where you need to jump in and take control and make sure that your message is direct and everybody understands. And the only way that you can see that they understand is if their day-to-day behavior and operational and a mode and delivery is all aligned with what you've been telling them, right? You can't jump in and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, and then jump out, right? Because the day-to-day is what matters, right? So now as a leader who might be a couple levels higher, how do you do that to make sure it's being done effectively? And trying to get your message and your values and your culture and the goals through is one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with.
Delicate balance, though, isn't it? It resonates. I do understand what you're saying, but without experiencing it, and probably making a mess of it, right? With a couple of people, just because of that delicate balance, and it's always a moving target, and the pace of change and the pace of growth sometimes. And look, we can bring in managers and bring in leaders or promote people with all of the information we have, but the reality is sometimes, they don't step up, or it's just not the right fit, So I suppose, you want to empower people, but I would imagine it's, unless you've got that wisdom of going through it a few times, it is probably a difficult muscle to grow, right?
It is. And I would say that it's really easy to be an outsider looking in and saying, oh, geez, when you're the director, life must be so great, right? And then also you look at other people who have certain ranks and you think, well, or some people might think, well, they got there because of X, Y, or Z reason. Otherwise, they wouldn't have that position, right? Well, you don't really know how they ended up in that position. I mean, it could have been anything.
Okay, yeah.
But what you said is true. There's always change. There's always change. And people don't like change. Changing teams. If you're an engineer and you get moved to another team, that can have a tremendous effect on your morale, on your trajectory at the company. I was doing all these great things on this old team. Now you want me to move over to this new one? I don't know what they're working on, or maybe you do, but it can be very jarring for some people to make a move like that. So
how have you grown, though, in relation to that, right? Making tough decisions with compassion. What have you actually done to get better at that? Because there's different tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
You've touched on one there. It doesn't mean that you're managing them out and that's a tough decision, or there's redundancy, or there's a reorg, but when you're moving them to, that's a tough decision. So that's the job, right?
Yeah.
If you're not making tough decisions, That comes with it, right? But it still needs to be mastered, right? It needs to be learned, and it's always changing, always evolving. Particularly that piece around compassion.
Yeah, I would agree.
Share.
I don't like using the term mastery because I feel like I never master anything. There's always more to learn.
Sure.
And the minute you think you've become a master of something, I think that's probably bad news, because that means you don't think there's any room for you.
More
to
of a
grow.
state today, more of a North Star of trying to
Right.
be the best version.
Sure.
Perhaps. Might be a better
So
way.
I think there's a couple of examples. One would be when you're dealing with people, and the other would be when you're dealing with something like projects or initiatives or whatever. On the people side, in your career, if you want to be a leader and you're in it for any length of time, you will experience people that might not be right for the role for whatever reason. And it's probably best for them and for the company if that person was not in that role. And so that's one of the things, is you have to understand that this is a human being. They have children. They have debt. Whatever the case may be, right? All this comes to play because we're human beings, and we have empathy, and we want to have compassion. But the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, it's a business. I'm going to be held accountable to achieving business goals. So therefore, I need people that I can hold accountable to achieving business goals. And if for whatever reason you are not going to work out in that position, it's best for you and the company if you weren't in that position. On the other side is like projects, like we talked about a minute ago. I've been at companies where we have been developing something for 6 months, 12 months. But then, and I've actually been on both sides of this, both as the manager of the team, as well as in the discussions that led to the decision that needs to be implemented. Project's not really what we want anymore, for whatever reason, right? Maybe it doesn't align with the strategy, or maybe we feel there's just too much invested in it, or maybe there's just been some kind of a merger where we bought somebody or they bought us, and now there's a more important project, so we still want to do that project, but we're just not going to do it right now. You have to keep morale up and keep everyone interested through that stuff. And I think that it's never easy, but you have to do it. You have to live through it. Like you said, how do you, I forget how you phrase it, but how do you do it with compassion? You have to do it. You're probably not going to do it well the first couple of times, but it's the experience that teaches you the lessons and gives you the scars. I'm a big believer in experience over theory. Like I can go ahead and read a book on programming, but until I download the IDE and I start compiling and I see what it's a very different experience. The same thing, based on my experience with leadership and management. I can read all the books in the world. I can watch all the LinkedIn learning courses on leadership, right? But until you live through it yourself and you experience all the emotions and all of the turmoil and conflict and everything that happens in the moment, you can't grow because you haven't lived through it.
Yeah. You said something earlier about partners and partnerships, and when you go into more senior management roles, the evolution of one's skills to be able to manage effectively with marketing or commercial or product, creating those meaningful relationships to those other functions, it seems to be even more important, right? The higher you go, like what have you learned about that journey of being able to learn other functions, work effectively, communicate effectively with those other areas? Because it's vital, isn't it? Like when you're in that senior management team, working with other functions of an organization like that, it's a big part, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the biggest joys of my week is the weekly exec staff meeting.
Oh, cool.
And the reason why is because I hear Tommy, our VP of sales, and Seth, our VP of the customer organization, and Steve, my partner in crime, the VP of product, talk about their sides of the business. And I learn so much from them. Being a CEO of something isn't really a aspiration that I have, but I feel like I'm learning a lot about how I could be a CEO through them and through, the CEO of LearnUpon and the CTO and the CFO and the COO. Like, that executive team teaches me a lot. And so that's one of the best meetings of the week for me. I learn a lot.
But did you just have that natural curiosity, and because you had that, it was easy, and you had that enthusiasm? Like, I'm wondering, is that just because you have that in you? Like, what if you don't maybe don't get the job? But you know what I mean? I'm trying to kind of challenge it a little bit, because like, if people are growing into those types of senior management roles, is there anything deliberate that you did there, or you just had that in your arsenal that you had that curiosity, you wanted to learn, you brought that level of enthusiasm and commitment to it, and therefore, you got better at learning everyone's roles,
right,
and appreciating it more? Maybe it is just that, but I'm wondering, is there any words of wisdom, Russ, words of wisdom?
I can say I didn't used to.
Okay. All right.
And I think that was probably mostly due to age and maturity at the time, right? Like, I had blinders on running this engineering team at whatever company. And I didn't necessarily have an appreciation at that time for the rest of things. And it, for many reasons probably, but maybe I was just so interested in trying to do the right thing or a good job running this team and getting the product out, or whatever the reason. I didn't used to have that curiosity about that specifically. Yeah. But I think it comes down to circumstances. And I do at LearnUpon. I did at lynda.com. Like, I think I grew into it, where naturally, as I got more experience on the tech side and tech leadership, it kind of naturally flowed into more senior leadership and executive leadership, and making those relationships and understanding how valuable they are really means a lot to me now. But it didn't when I was younger. I think people change, they grow, and that's certainly the path that I'm on.
Maybe sometimes everyone doesn't maybe have the opportunity to experience those other. Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of trying to look at some parallels between the joy that you got in Linda and then clearly the joy you're getting now. Loads of learnings obviously in that post-acquisition LinkedIn, but if you think of the strings to your bow when you're in a smaller company with more exposure, that clearly kind of filled your cup. And then when you're rocking into your recent chapter, perhaps it is that, just that ability to have more of a broader access, variety, influence, Perhaps that maybe.
Like, if I had joined like Amazon instead of LearnUpon, I would likely feel differently. Like, I would still be interested in meeting and building relationships with other business leaders, but I would be at a different level, and it would be very different circumstances. But this particular group of execs at LearnUpon, like, I love learning from them and going through things with them together. Yeah. It's a really rewarding experience for me.
Yeah, and I can tell. Are there any like real tangible differences in the working culture in comparison, like, say, I don't know, Ireland, Europe, the States? What have you witnessed? Because there's lots of things that people say, and I'd love to just get some primary.
Yeah.
What's like, and I don't want to. Your experience right now, right? And there's no right or wrong here, right? Because there's certain perceptions of kind of work ethic in different regions, different locations. Is that a thing? Or is it more about the company? Is it just different no matter, like, what's been your experience? And go for it now.
Yeah. I do feel like there's a difference.
Okay.
Not so much for me when I moved over to Ireland from LinkedIn, because I was still working for LinkedIn and I was still working with a lot of people in the US and the Bay Area.
Right.
I had to leave LinkedIn Ireland to experience something very different. And at LearnUpon, like we genuinely value a work-life balance. So something that I was doing at Linda and even more so at LinkedIn was, checking the phone every 60 seconds. Anything to do, or maybe not 60 seconds, but
Sure.
you check your Slack, you check your emails, everything okay, any fires I need to put out, right? And still to this day, it's been 2.5 years since I left LinkedIn. I still have that reaction, right? So I have to I have to digitally remove Slack from my phone, and then I'm okay. I don't do it, right? And I'm okay with that, right? But when Slack is there and Gmail is there and Google Calendar is there, I'm constantly going into the three of them. I don't know if that is a factor of the United States and its working culture. I don't know if it's a factor of LinkedIn or big tech or the Bay Area or whatever, but it's something that I still feel here, even if the company that I work at, has a very different culture. I still have those instincts and those habits, but I observe other people, companies here in Ireland a little bit. I think for me, Ireland seems a bit more chill, a bit more appreciative of your environment. It's a beautiful country, and often there's clouds in the sky, but it's a beautiful country.
It's the nicest way I've heard it.
Yeah, lots of history. But for me, my experiences, like in the Bay Area and before, there was more of a grind. There was more of a work time doesn't really stop. And I frequently tell people this. I can't just turn it off, right? And I don't know if that's just me or my upbringing or, working in big tech or whatever the case may be. I don't attribute it to anything. But at 6 p.m., there's no switch that I go and turn off and then I don't think about work or I don't check in on certain things, because my mind doesn't work like that. Sometimes when you're away for 45 minutes, maybe you're outside going for a walk or you play a video game or whatever the case is, you're like, oh, that's the answer. And then you go back and you do it and whatever. Like, I love those moments. Now, other people can just turn it off, right? They'll say goodbye at whatever the time is for them when they've worked a full day. You won't hear from them again unless 9 o'clock the next morning rolls around. And I say great for them, right? They have found a way to say, this is my boundary, right? I find that I don't want to say work more, but or achieve more, but I find that I work through problems and ideas more when that switch just doesn't exist, because I never know when the idea is going to be there, right?
Yeah.
Like, one of the most productive times for me is the minute I wake up. Okay. Right? Like that I know I have like 2 hours before people start coming in. Right. And I mean, coming in, I mean, the working day starts. Sure. But that's time for me to just dive into all the stuff that's open. I keep a list of, I think this is a book somewhere. I don't remember the name of it, but it's Now and Later. Right. And it's just a list of, what do I need to do now? What can wait until later? That's how I organize my day. Right. I don't have priority 7. Right. It's just now or later. And every morning I sort that list. I focus on what needs to be focused on. So, yeah.
What is that? Sanmitsu, is it? Is that the correct? Say it.
Sanmitsu. Sanmitsu, yeah.
What you said.
This
right.
is
What is that?
I learned this concept through a martial art that I used to practice. And essentially it means the triple secret, right? And Sanmitsu refers to your thoughts, your speech or your words, and your actions, and the reality that those create, especially for yourself. So, in a business sense, this might manifest as I am really not happy with how that release went or the quality of the feature. And even though I'm frustrated, right, I'm going to pull everyone into a room and say, this is not good enough. What are we thinking? You know, do I have to bring in other people, whatever? That's certainly one thing I could do. But that's going to create a reality where people feel, you know, like deflated and like I'm angry and whatever. Or I could take, there's this thing, another mnemonic I have, which is this, the number one, which is the one breath meditation, right? I could take a breath and I could think about what do I want to create here, right? Yes, I really wish the release went better. But if I am going to get everybody into a room or on a Zoom call or whatever to talk about this, what do I want them to take away? And then what actions am I going to take either during to make sure they get that message or those messages? You know, we strive for product quality. You know, we put the customers at the heart of everything that we do. And I could be inspiring in that way. And then the follow-ups, okay, how am I going to make sure that they all know how to do better or whatever? That's the Sanmitsu. That's the triple secret.
Okay.
And go ahead.
So basically, right, again, just in my simple way of understanding it. So let's say something has gone wrong and it's like some fire, sometimes if the clock is ticking, right, and we need to solve something, a lot of the knee-jerk reaction is to get it when there's an intensity to react, right?
Yeah.
But your approach, nearly reverse engineering it from the endpoint. You know, what do we really want? What's the best outcome here? And then coming back to that, and then just being very deliberate in your approach, then to kind of basically tackling that, and then just being that conscious of all of those steps, and then what is the consequences of how you're making other people feel? Is it kind of just being more just that awareness? Is that?
Well, awareness is certainly a part of it, but it's completely dependent on circumstances.
Sure.
There have been like emergencies or escalated issues that have come in where sometimes it helps if you can simplify, take things off the team that's reacting, take things off their plate so that they can focus on it. Other times I've come in and I've been like, team, I would just like everyone to take a half an hour because clearly tempers are high or whatever the case may be.
Like de-escalate.
And we're going to shut off the Zoom or whatever. And I want everybody to just take a breath and then we're going to come back together. It entirely depends on the situation. So you have to be cognizant, okay, is the sky falling down? No? Okay, then maybe we have a little bit of time. Let's think about this. Yeah. If the sky is falling down, then I do think what you need is very direct leadership and like somebody who's driving the car. Fred Kaufman uses an analogy, passenger versus driver or a victim player, right? I prefer players, right? It's not, hey, this thing failed. It's this thing has failed. What can I do about it, right? It's very different. So
rather than pointing, it's
that's
kind
right.
of that ownership piece.
That's right.
What can we actually?
Ownership and accountability.
Yeah,
that's right.
That makes sense.
So it really depends on the situation, right? And that's why I totally fail these tests. Have you ever had one of these things? I don't remember what they're called. Maybe it's a behavioral test or whatever. Where you answer a bunch of questions and you have to pick like A or B. Yeah. And then they give you this color chart and they say, this is you. I fail those horribly because my answer to every question is, well, it depends on the situation, right? And so it really depends on the situation. That's why as you get more and more experience, theoretically you go higher and higher up the ladder. You try lots of things, and ideally you find tools along your path that you add to your toolbox. And then you can use those tools whenever you need. Sometimes you'll learn about a better tool, so you'll take one of your old tools out and you put the new tool in.
Sure, yeah.
But that's what experience gives you, is a tool set that you can use.
When you look ahead, right, and look at the future of leadership, particularly in kind of technology leadership, like, are there any things that, you know, like that you're seeing that we need to evolve in more areas? Like, you know, you're growing and developing leaders, and again, with a bit of a future lens right now, is there anything more that we probably need to work harder on in relation to future-proofing that leadership teams for the way businesses are evolving and changing? You know, like, are there any kind of...
It's really hard to say.
I know that's quite a broad thing to ask you, but just in case there was anything in your... Obviously, there's loads of disruptions, there's loads of things happening, there's always innovative things going on, but I'm just curious about you and your journey and looking at growing and developing leaders and your own kind of evolution of the toolbox, as you alluded to there. Is there anything different that you think we need to be aware of or put more attention on or effort on? Or
I think that in companies that I aspire to work for, a strong culture code is really important. I call this the trifecta. It's the company culture code, first and foremost, then it's your job description, and then it's your career ladder. Right. Once you're armed with those three things, you should have a guide map to how to do well. I think that certain companies probably don't necessarily need that, but in technology companies, I think that that's really useful. I know that it was helpful for me. And at times, maybe I put those things on too high of a pedestal, but I like having things to aspire to. And if the culture code that you have is genuinely aligned with life values as well, I find that even easier. So, for example, one of our values at LearnUpon is lead with curiosity. That's a pretty good way to go through life, leading with curiosity instead of judgment. Right?
Yeah, I like that.
Putting customers first. Some companies, that's not important, right? Some companies, it's all about the sales. But if LearnUpon, we put the customer first, it's evident in our service, right? Amazon has a history of customer obsession, right? I dig those kinds of companies, not the ones that are just like, let's just maximize sales and we'll deal with it later, or whatever the mission is. So I would say that what I feel we could benefit from is more codified cultures, whatever they may be, at the companies, such that the people who work there have something to aspire to. And in doing that, I think you're going to find people grow up in the right way, or the way that's right for the company at that time anyway.
So I want to thank you so much for being generous with your time. It's lovely to have you in Ireland, actually. It's nice to even recognize that, and hopefully you're here for a lot more years. So thank you for being generous with your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Very nice to meet you.